Hello friends, this video on reproduction in plants part 3 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So now we are going to discuss about each of these modes of reproduction. So first we will start with asexual reproduction, and here we will see what are the different types of asexual reproduction. So as I have mentioned before, in this type of reproduction, new individuals are formed from a single parent. So here new individuals are exactly identical to the parent. It is not about similarity. They are like totally exactly same as that of the parent. It is a faster mode of reproduction. So one organism at one time, they give rise to hundreds of new organisms. So it is very fast. So examples of organisms where it is seen, mostly unicellular organisms. For example, you have you see so many organisms on the screen, right? For example, Hydra, this is Hydra. Amoeba, so amoeba is again unicellular. Euglena, you see, you might not be familiar with these names, but these are, very tiny organisms which cannot be seen with naked eye, and also a lot of them are not seen around us. Some of them live in the oceans, some of them are found in moist and damp places. So maybe you would have not seen them, but all these organisms also exist. The bacteria, I'm sure even if you have not seen a bacteria, because it is again microscopic, but you would have heard about it because they are mostly known to us for causing several diseases. So people say that, okay, I got a bacterial infection, right? So bacteria, again, they reproduce asexually, and that is why, they multiply very fast. Their numbers increases extremely fast. It is also seen in a number of plants, for example, rose, onion, potato. So these are some of the plants where asexual reproduction takes place. So now let us look at the various types of asexual reproduction. That is the various ways by which asexual reproduction can happen. So some of the common types are fission, budding, regeneration, fragmentation, spore formation, and vegetative propagation. So see, these are all types of asexual reproduction. So different types of organisms again will reproduce differently even though they are undergoing asexual reproduction. So let us talk about each of these types in detail. So first we will talk about fission. The word fission, what does it mean? It means splitting, to split. To split into two halves or to split into multiple halves. That is fission, that is splitting. So when an organism splits into two or more new individuals, that is called fission. So that means there is no process involved at all for reproduction to take place, because in your higher classes when you will learn about reproduction in human beings, you will see that a lot of complexity is involved for the process to take place. But here it is pretty simple. The organism itself will break into two halves, or it will break into many halves, and each of those halves will be a new organism. So that kind of splitting is known as fission. Now this sounds weird, right? Because we have never seen that a human being splits into two halves and two new organisms are formed. That doesn't happen, right? So that's why it is sounding weird to us. But this type of fission happens in a lot of unicellular organisms. And one very common example is amoeba. Amoeba is a very common example where fission takes place. Now again, fission can also be of two types, that is binary fission and multiple fission. The term binary means two and the term multiple means many. I think now I do not need to explain what is binary fission and what is multiple fission. So binary fission means if the organism splits into two halves. So let us say this is the organism, it splits into two halves like this. So that is called binary fission. And if an organism splits into multiple halves, into many halves, that is called multiple fission. So let us look at an example of binary fission. So in case of binary fission, two new individuals are formed because that organism is going to split into two equal halves, and each of those halves is going to be a new organism. So let's take an example. It happens mostly in the unicellular organisms like amoeba, paramecium, euglena, bacteria. So in all these organisms, binary fission happens. Now how this happens? Let's have a look at that. So these are those organisms, and this is how binary fission happens. So this is how an amoeba looks like. So, amoeba generally, it doesn't have a specific shape and specific form. So, it is like very random in shape. And you see, this is the nucleus. So, what is nucleus? Now, we all know that our body is made up of cell. Now, we are multicellular organisms, we human beings. So, our body is made up of many cells, and inside every cell, there is, the head of the cell, the control center of the cell. So, that is the nucleus. So, this is nucleus. Now here in case of amoeba, it is unicellular, that is, it is made up of one cell. So this is just one cell. So one cell, and that cell has to have a nucleus, so there is one nucleus. And nucleus is very important because nucleus controls all the activities that take place inside the cell. That is why it is called control center of the cell. Now during binary fission, this nucleus, it kind of elongates, it expands. And then gradually it divides into two halves. You see here, it was one here. In the next step, it just got expanded. And in the third step, it is like almost going far apart. And then it got divided into two. So initially there was just one nucleus. And now here, if you see, there are two nuclei. But the two parts are still joined together. And finally they get separated. So you get 1 and 2. So two organisms are formed from one organism. So in this case, what did we see? That this parent organism, the parent amoeba, it got split into two halves, and that gave rise to two new organisms. But in this case, the parent doesn't exist anymore. So this was the parent. Now the parent only got divided into two daughter organisms. So the parent will not exist after the reproduction is done. And also this type of splitting, in some organisms, the splitting happens along a specific plane. That means there will be a specific plane where it will get splitted. So one such example is an organism called Leishmania. So this is an organism where the splitting will only happen along this particular plane. So it is not that randomly it will split anywhere. So that's not the case. Whereas if you look at amoeba, in this case, splitting can happen just along any plane. So anyways, as I said, amoeba doesn't have any specific shape also. So it has got a very random shape. So here the splitting can happen along any plane, and it is just that the entire process of fission starts with the expansion of the nucleus. So the nucleus expands and finally divides into two parts, and then the two daughter cells are formed. And this type of binary fission generally happens under favorable conditions. So when the conditions are favorable, only then binary fission takes place. So it happens under favorable conditions. The next type of fission, that is multiple fission, where, as I mentioned, that here one organism will split to form many new organisms. So like in case of binary fission, two new organisms were formed. Here many new organisms will be formed. So here the nucleus continuously keeps on dividing over and again. Now in the earlier case, we saw that the nucleus divided into two nuclei. Here, the nucleus will continuously keep on dividing. So, multiple nuclei will be formed. Now, when multiple nuclei are formed, so multiple new individuals are also formed. This takes place under unfavorable conditions. This is very important. So you see, both of them are fission. Binary fission and multiple fission, both are different types of fission. But binary fission happens under favorable conditions and multiple fission happens under unfavorable conditions. Now what do we mean by unfavorable condition? Now when the environmental conditions are not favorable for the survival of the organism, then what happens? The organism covers itself with a cyst, with a kind of covering to protect from that unfavorable condition. And when this cyst formation takes place, only then this multiple fission happens. This happens in a lot of organisms like amoeba, plasmodium, many algae. So let us look at this example, how it happens. Now, whenever there are unfavorable conditions, this kind of covering happens around the cell of that organism to protect itself against the unfavorable condition. And what happens inside this cyst? So this is the cyst which is formed during unfavorable condition. Inside the cyst, the nucleus keeps on dividing continuously. So you see, this was the cell. Now you have a cyst like this, and inside this, the nucleus is continuously dividing. So here you had just one nucleus. Now you have so many nucleus inside that cyst. Now, so many nuclei are formed. Now, when the unfavorable conditions go and the favorable conditions return, then all these nuclei are released as daughters. So, the cyst vanishes away, the cyst breaks up, and all the nuclei are released. And each of these nuclei develop into new organisms. So, basically, you started from one organism and now you got many organisms. So this is the process of multiple fission. So here this red colored outer covering which you see, that is nothing but the cyst, and inside the cyst the nucleus division takes place, and during favorable conditions the cyst breaks down and then the nuclei are released out. Now this multiple fission, this kind of fission happens very commonly in Plasmodium. So Plasmodium is the malarial parasite. So this is that organism which is responsible for malaria in human beings. So these are the two types of fission. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more educational videos with a better experience. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for latest updates. Thank you once again.